Today is Thursday, May 23rd, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, and I'm here as always with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, episode number 100.
It is episode number 100, or as many of our listeners are surely thinking of it as episode 10 squared.
All of them are thinking that.
All of them, that's right. No, it has been a wonderful run. Thank you for Mr. Robinson for being willing to do this many podcasts together. Really enjoyed it. And for all of our listeners, our teens and young adults and any of their family members had to listen around, we wanted to do something special today for episode 100. So we have, I wouldn't say begged and pleaded. That would be mean. It sounded like he wasn't interested. From the first moment we brought it up, he said he was happy to do it. And he is a very busy man. We're very grateful for his time. We have on with us today Mr. Gerald Weston. Mr. Weston, hello.
Hello, and congratulations on 100 episodes. It's amazing how quickly they add up.
It is, actually. We were kind of stunned to see the 3 digits show up there in the number sequence.
So that put us at right about 2 years or a little over?
I look back, I think the first one we put on the Living Youth YouTube channel was January 2022. So it's been about two and a half.
Okay.
2.5, because our first season was a little shorter.
Right, and we've missed it.
And we do miss a few here and there, like last weekend. But so we don't just have him on to sit and say hello and then leave. We plan on asking him some questions we hear you guys talk about from time to time, and to get his perspective. And so the title, we'll see what the title of this is after we record it all. But essentially, I want to talk to Mr. Weston about end time things and how we should be thinking about our futures. Does it sound like you're going to be game for that, Mr. Weston?
Oh, sounds like fun.
Okay, then we'll get going. Welcome back. And again, we're very grateful to have Mr. Weston here, and we don't want to waste his time. We know he's got meetings to do. In fact, Mr. Robinson and I have a meeting in just an hour and 45 minutes or so we also need to be ready. So we're going to jump right into the questions, Mr. Weston. And we don't pretend anything here. We've done our best to prep Mr. Weston about what we're going to talk about. We might interact with what he says, but he's good on his feet. But we've done his best to give him a heads up of what we plan on talking about. So the first question is, you have mentioned, I've heard it in sermons, heard it even yesterday, I think, in the ministerial conference and the council meetings, that we really do seem to be in pivotal times right now. What is it? What is it you see in the world around us right now that seems to make you think biblically that we should expect these to be critical times? Is it something biblical in particular, or is it just that it's a chaotic world?
Well, I think, first of all, there are a lot of people that recognize that these aren't really normal times. Now, we have to understand that there have been a lot of times through man's history that are not, quote, normal. The 1930s, leading up to World War II, is really what it looks like on the surface for those who study history at all, where we might be. One thing I have tried to emphasize in recent times is that we should not look at every skirmish around the world, every volcano, every tsunami, every hurricane as a sign of the end. Because when you read when you read the 24th chapter of Matthew, as well as the other Olivet prophecies, it says these are the beginning of sorrows, or don't be overly concerned about it because all these things must happen. And we've had these things happen. Mount Vesuvius erupted in, I believe, 79 A.D., destroyed Pompeii, a major event. We've had a lot of events down through history. But the focus of Bible prophecy is on the house of Israel. And we read in Ezekiel, the 3rd chapter, and the 33rd chapter, that there has to be a watchman warning Israel what is to come, because they are hard-headed and stiff-necked. Also, Judah and Jerusalem, and it's important to connect the two, Judah and Jerusalem. And we find in Zechariah 12 and 14 how the world is going to be against the Jews, and they're going to be in Jerusalem. And this simply could not have happened until the time of the end, at least until 1948, more like 1967 with the Six-Day War. So this has to be sometime after that. We see the whole world gathering together against them. We had 3 of the European countries now are wanting to have a a second state there. The two-state solution, which is idiotic to think that it could happen, considering the rivals that they have there. And the third thing is Europe itself in Revelation, the 17th chapter, which is the culmination of Daniel 2, Daniel 7, even Daniel 8 is in there a little bit, and Revelation 13, Revelation 17, where we see this beast power rising up in Europe. And so when we put it all together, we see a moral decline in the Israelite people, a terrible moral decline that is shocking to most of us. Even those who are younger, I think, are surprised by what's happening in our world today, where we have men competing in women's sports and this type of thing, and that's just probably the least of the problems. So you have all of those things happening. At the same time, Daniel 12 and verse 4 talks about many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And just in the last year, the increase in knowledge with AI, we heard about AI before, but now we're beginning to see it in real time. And knowledge is increasing at an exponential rate. And we wonder how much knowledge will have to increase before the end actually comes. So you have all these things and you bring them together, and then you have other prophecies talking about how the alien will rise up higher and higher, and you'll be lower and lower. And we see that right in our news, where we have all these illegal aliens. I refuse to call them undocumented. They may be undocumented, but they're illegal in this country, and they're rising up higher and higher, and those who are native Israelites, and we don't want to be offensive to anybody, but Paul talked about the Gentiles, and he talked about Jews, and we being the Jews, although he was Benjamite, but in a broad sense Jew, and so we have all of that taking place, and it's hard to not believe that we are in really something brand new, and it's happening very, very quickly.
I appreciate your comment about illegal aliens, which we used to understand. Technically, it's true. An alien is someone who comes from another country, and it's illegal if it's against the laws of the country. To me, it would be like taking car thieves and making up the term lacking in title. We have so many people lacking in title. But being people that stole a car. And I should highlight, because we got I get angry letters, a lot. An angry letter by someone who read our article about the chaos of the borderless world that's sort of cropping up around us. And each time he's written more than once. Once I said, I don't think you read the article. And then he wrote again and said, I read it. And he was just as angry. And it's like, but he was talking about things that, as if we didn't say those things. The article talks about compassion on a lot of these people. They're coming from terrible countries, many of them just trying to make a better life. Yes, there's also ne'er-do-wells who are coming. But regardless, there's a compassion for such individuals. But the idea that this is the way to handle that, no, it's bad for them. It's bad for everybody else. Of course, there is no solution without Jesus Christ. But I appreciate you standing up for just plain old language.
I might add here that I've been an alien myself. Living in Canada, I was an alien, and living in the UK, an alien. So, but legally, that's the difference.
I can't wait for the sound snippet to come out of that. Gerald Weston admits he's an alien.
What is that, lizard person?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, moving on to our next question. I've heard a lot of, I questioned this when I was younger, and I've heard other younger people ask, how do you watch? We're commanded to watch world conditions, world events, so that we're aware of what's going on. Over the years, how have you watched and kept up with world events? Has it evolved over time where you've modified your approach to it a bit? I've seen some take that as just like watch the 24/7 news cycle, and I've learned that's excessive and it'll make you depressed. So what have you found that's a good balance for our young listeners in particular on how to keep up with world events but kind of keep it all in perspective?
Well, I think we're all going to listen to something. I say we all are. Maybe not everybody is. And it's critical that we listen to more than one source. I think we all have our favorites, and I certainly have mine. I have an advantage that some people don't have, and that is I get a lot of news reports from around the world. from different individuals who send me information. And yet, even there, it's very important that we look at the source. What is the background of it? For example, if you get something from the Atlantic magazine, which some fellow sends me from time to time, I have to read it with a certain filter, recognizing that it is an extremely liberal publication. If you had listened to something like Fox News, you have to recognize that that's a very conservative source, and you have to be able to filter and not just swallow everything that you hear, although I think that they're probably closer to the truth than, say, MSNBC. There's no doubt in my mind on that, but which I can't even stand to watch. But nevertheless, you have to be careful what you hear and not assume that just because it says something that you might like, or an individual says something that you might like, that is necessarily true. You have to filter that and not allow your emotions to run with you. I think it's very important not to go down rabbit holes, because this is something that is new in our world with the internet, with algorithms where they see what you're interested in and they just feed you more and more material on that. And one of the things that came out of our Council of Elders meeting was the surprising number in one particular area of flat earthers. And you wonder, how in the world can people believe the earth is flat today? Well, they have some very tricky arguments, and I know that Mr. Smith likes to do battle with flat earthers.
Put likes in quotes there.
Yeah. Have you ever won, Mr. Smith?
I was going to, yeah, same thing. I've not seen anybody that's changed their opinion on that, because they're so convinced of it. They've been fed nothing but flat earth information, and that's what they believe.
You know, who was it? Well, one of the men there in the council talked about when they discussed it with some of these non-members, but younger people outside of the church who had expressed an interest. To a certain extent, you have kind of a sympathy when they ask, how could you believe this in the face of this evidence, this? And they said, look, because they were younger, and they said, our whole lives, everybody's been lying to us. You know, they've kind of like caught on that and as a result, they just don't see any trustworthy sources, and they're just kind of putting things together. But a lot of times what they don't realize is by abandoning all these main sources, they're really just tapping into even less trustworthy sources, but then swallowing that. Right. It's like when you talk to someone who says, I don't really listen to anybody. But then you find out, you look at their YouTube channels, and they actually do listen to a lot of people they happen to have handpicked to say something they like. Concerning that, to follow up on this same question, I appreciate you commenting on algorithms and how they start to see what we're interested in, they start to feed us, and it starts to intensify, because I think, especially with younger people these days, we have, at least in America, you have Republicans, you have Democrats. They would love all those fresh young voters to think like they do. And it's easy as an American to kind of start getting caught up in this. It's tinged politically, but boy, I really like the way they take this, because it's also sort of social, what I agree with. And next thing you know, you're really just following a lot of fairly hardcore political things. And I've seen in the broader Church of God world, if you will, there are some organizations that have virtually become, and I say pro-Trump organizations, that really almost like they're working hard to get him reelected, which that God didn't seem to call us for. I say seem. He did not. He did not call us for that. But is there any kind of special concern you would have to recommend to our younger listeners how to avoid falling into that trap, where you hear sympathetic political arguments, you're sympathetic to some of the things they're saying, but you don't want to falling into line, so to speak, in a political way?
Well, I don't know if there's a simple answer to it, but again, you have to get back where you filter things and you try to learn truth, not from who it is, but what they're actually saying. A good example, and this is something I'm a little bit conflicted on, the supreme leader there over in Iran was killed in a helicopter accident. And so the government, the U.S. government, officially sent out condolences to them. And others, the other side of the aisle, took him to task because this is an enemy. We should not, be supporting that. Well, I don't know.
Right.
Are we happy when was it Mr. Blinken said we're not happy when anybody dies. I think that there is some element of truth to that, and I have a certain sympathy toward that. At the same time, the butcher of Tehran is not somebody that you necessarily want to.
Yeah, the name was assigned for a reason. People did call
Right.
him that for a reason. Yeah.
Right. So I'm a little bit conflicted on what's the best approach on that, because God wants us to honor government in the right way and the leaders and so forth. So everybody has his own opinion on it. I don't imagine I'm going to sway anybody on that, other than maybe just surprised that I don't have a strong opinion on it. But I think the point is that just because an administration that you might not particularly care for does something doesn't mean that they're wrong in what they did. Everything is not wrong. But if you listen to certain sources, there's no good that comes out of the current administration. If you listen to other sources, there's no good that comes out of his opponent running for office. And I think we have to just be careful about that and not be so polarized that we are unable to recognize that there are truths on both sides.
I appreciate that. Let's look a little more broadly, if you will, and talk about Western civilization. And even though we do have listeners actually who are in the church but are not in Western civilization has for some time been the elephant in the bed with you, where you're trying to be roommates and it rolls over. You have no choice but to deal with it. Western civilization really doesn't matter to all of our listeners, whether we're a part of it or not. And we're, of course, living in it. I've been Western civilization since I was born. That's really all I know in terms of my life. And I can say for myself, and I know Mr. Robinson can say the same thing, I was born in the beginning of the 70s. I really kind of started paying more attention to life in the world towards the end of the 70s and into the 80s. And I can compare that to life now as I'm in my 50s, and I never would have thought that I would have seen the changes that we have seen. At the same time, Mr. Weston, hope you don't mind if I point out that you're older than we are. I don't think you would. Why would you? It's a crown for a man to have wisdom and experience. You have been around even longer and have surely seen things that your eyes have seen things now at this age, at this time, that you never would have imagined when you were the age of our listeners, or as a teen and a young adult. What do you see now, for instance, that might just be accepted, but would have been unimaginable to you when you were their age?
Some of the changes that I've seen have been simply technological changes. I don't think we realize how technology changes us. And let me give it a good example of that. There was a time when I was born and started growing up, there was no television. I guess it was probably invented shortly after I was born, but nobody had one. I remember the first television that I ever saw. It was about 1953 or thereabouts, maybe 54. And that took people out from outside into the house. It took them away from fellowshipping or interacting with friends and put them interacting with somebody that was an actor or a game show or whatever it might be. On top of that, air conditioning was something that I didn't know of growing up. And especially in a car, I can remember driving across the desert, the southwestern desert, without air conditioning. I wasn't driving, but it was a way to be cooked very quickly. At any rate, that took us in the house again. And so instead of sitting on the front porch in the cool of the day and talking with your neighbors, we were brought inside. That changed us as people, as human beings. What we see today are the changes that have taken place as a result of social media, the cell phone. I'm reading a book on the anxious generation, and it's got its issues and problems. But what it does point out is that somewhere around 2012, there was a dramatic rise in anxiety, in depression, especially among girls, and just a total change in young people going through puberty. And it has continued to change as time's gone by, and it isn't just an American situation. They did studies in 37 different countries, and not including the Anglosphere, which there was kind of separately studied. So we find that technology has changed us. The computer has changed every one of us. I didn't want a computer early on because I saw the changes in other people. They sat in front of their computer instead of going out and visiting, as we used to do as ministers, quite a bit more. Another change is working wives. When I grew up, yes, there were women who worked during the war, but they weren't necessarily career women. I knew very few people whose mothers worked. But I've seen how that's changed our world. Instead of having dinner on Saturday evening, Friday, everybody's working, they're tired, so they go out to eat. It's just changed our world dramatically in those ways. Of course, things that I would never imagine are men competing in women's sports. The trans movement, homosexuality. I mean, did we ever hear of it? Yes, but we just didn't know of it. And now it's so open. It's amazing how the morals of our country have been turned upside down. I think of the example of Harrison Buckner, who, the kicker for the
Harrison Butker.
Butker, yeah. For the Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs. And he says that the highest aspiration of many of the ladies that were in the crowd was to be a wife and a mother. And I think that's probably still true of most people. They want to get married sometime, but they may postpone it a lot. And not every woman does. But to say that and find that to be controversial, I mean, some of these people have come unglued. In fact, there was an editorial in the Toronto Star that said that they should fire him, even though he is arguably one of the top 2 or 3 all-time kickers in the NFL, and hire a woman instead, which is total insanity.
I really wish they would. I keep thinking that. I just
Oh,
wish
no,
they
no,
would do
no,
that.
not the Kansas City Chiefs, but well, I have a friend up in Canada that sent me an article on that, and I should have replied to him the fact that Manitoba, I don't know, University of Manitoba, one of those places up there, they have a woman kicker.
Really?
Yes, that's Canadian, and not the Kansas City Chiefs, though. And in fact, Mahone and the whole organization has come out in his support.
Oh, I'm sure. I've seen mostly support for that.
Yeah.
The commentary I read in the Guardian from a woman who I'm not surprised she tends to take this. She just called that speech, which we hope to have a podcast about the speech, but she called it hateful and bigoted, and it shows the bigots are winning. And she talked about how. Here you have these women who've just paid tens of thousands, of dollars for this education, and he goes and tells them that I know most of you really you really want to be a wife and a homemaker, and she talked about how offensive that is, but then also she talked about how upset she was because he got 18 seconds of applause from the graduates, and she said, and a lot of women, most of the women were there applauding as well, and it's like, well, then who's out of step? Is it her, the commentary writer, or is it these women? No, they responded pretty positively to that.
His shirt sales have gone through the roof. In fact, they're selling more of his than they are of Mahomes or Kelsey.
Yeah.
So,
and Kelsey, that's a big deal. Yeah,
Maybe they could sell Taylor Swift jerseys. Those would.
I happened to be in Los Angeles here recently, and the only car I got was it wasn't a car, it was a pickup because they were running out of vehicles. And I was trying to adjust the radio as I'm driving through Los Angeles, and the only thing I could get on there it said Taylor channel, and I didn't realize it was Taylor Swift's channel.
Wow.
And so to be subjected to Taylor Swift's music for about an hour was rather torturous.
That's funny.
My first thought, this is going to sound really dumb, and it actually doesn't date me accurately, but I thought of Rip Taylor. Do you remember Rip Taylor?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought, how can they have a whole channel of Rip Taylor? Okay. Anyway, we don't want to cut you off. Did you have more on that?
No, that's just...
Okay, well, that's
I'm not trying to denigrate her music. I just never had known the songs that she sang, and when they're praising her, because it's all about her, it was a little bit disgusting.
Well, it is interesting. I've heard like a Peggy Noonan, even I think on the Wall Street Journal, has written about her, about how she has really taken charge of her business, and has built quite the empire. And a certain kind of respect. Like she's enlivened the other economies of other countries simply by being there and hiring people for her concert. And I'll start thinking, maybe some of her music. And then sure enough, I'll land on one or something here on the radio and think, I don't want to listen to that, in terms of the topics and themes. But I know there are some songs out there I suspect that are just fine for listen to. But I don't know, give me my old soundtracks.
We'll give them their due. The one thing I've learned over a period of time, especially doing television a little bit, is the people that are in that business are good at what they do.
Right.
You may not agree with them, but they're good at what they do. And she has certainly sold herself in ways that you have to give her credit. She's built an empire.
Yeah, and I hear she's very positive with her fans. That's one thing. A lot of them, she's not snooty about that. She actually loves her fans and recognizes that's why she's there. And I do look forward to, whether it's during the millennial reign or whether it's the Great White Throne Judgment, hearing some of these people, focusing their talents in a direction that that I would love to see. So anyway, we're gonna get to the next question.
The next question. Okay. You alluded to this in the first question about what are signs around us that we see that make us conclude that we're in the end times. Not only in the end times, we're kind of entering the beginning of the end sort of thing. Not that you said that, no one. But one of the things you alluded to was it's not just people in the church that have recognized the times are weird and strange things are going on. And I wanted to echo that as I lead into the next question. I was, as we were answering like how we get our media and our news, and I was thinking, well, I have two official sources, and then there's about 5 independent, what I'll call what's an independent journalist these days, and I'll listen to them here and there if they have a clip that sounds interesting. And a bunch of them have said we're in unprecedented times, we're in uncharted territory. I think what's different about now, as opposed to in the past when things were scary. And I agree. I mean, if we went back into pre-World War II, we would think that this is, and into World War II, that was the end. Except now we have a whole bunch of nuclear devices and a whole lot of things that can kill a whole lot of people real fast. Kind of a long lead up to the question. With things this bad, it's pretty reasonable for younger people in the church to be concerned about those conditions. And then, in the church we've understood for a long time, Matthew 24:19, where we're warned, Christ warns those, woe to those who are pregnant and nursing babies in those days. What would you say to younger people in the church, whether they're about to get married, they're married, or haven't started their families yet? What would you advise them about how to strike the right balance with, things are scary, yet at the same time, what should they do?
Well, I think the worst thing they can do is just stop living. They need to live and to recognize that, well, it looks like it's very close to the end, and I truly believe that it is. Not that I live to see the end, but I certainly think it's within the lifespan of people my age. Nevertheless, young people need to realize that there have been other times that have looked pretty scary as well. And the scripture says, woe to those. It doesn't say don't have children. It just says, look, it's going to be difficult at that time for anyone who's pregnant or is nursing babies. But also the context of it is those who are in Judea flee to the mountains and so forth, although it is a time of fleeing of one sort or another because the abomination of desolation is set up and the tribulation begins some 30 days later. So there is a time of fleeing. But we don't know exactly how many years there are. If I go back to the time when I was at a master college, we thought that the end could come in the 70s. And there were, I don't have time to go into all the reasons for it, but 19-year cycles and various other things. And the way that things looked, it was pretty bizarre back in the late 60s, early 70s. There were riots in the streets, far worse than anything that we've seen in the last 5 years. There were bombings of police stations. There was the bombing of the Capitol. There were murders that were taking place, and there was a revolution. And those revolutionaries have come back now with a more intellectual approach toward things, but nevertheless, it was a scary time. So we thought that maybe the end could come then. Well, that was I graduated in 1969 from Ambassador College, and some of my friends did get married, as I did, but they had children, and they have grandchildren, and some of them have great-grandchildren or will have great-grandchildren very shortly. So what if we had taken that approach back then? Where would we be today? Where would this generation be with the church? Because many of the people in the church today their parents go back to that time. I think the real key is for young people to do the right thing, always to do the right thing and not worry about what's going to happen as a result. The world's tough. The world is at war with God. It's at war with the values that God gives. But each young person needs to know what he believes, and he must also be courageous to stand up for what he believes. But as far as children go, have children. We have a lot of young people here with children. Go ahead and have children, live on, and yes, it may be tough at a certain point in time, but the scripture never says don't have children. It just says woe. In other words, it's a time that's going to be difficult for those at that point in time. So we can take the approach of just being safe about everything. Well, I'm fearful that there will be a difficult time ahead, so I don't want that. But think about the fact that your children can grow up not only in this age, but transfer over into the age to come, and they could be the leaders at that time in a physical sense. They could be rebuilding the cities. And this is something we talked about at the Council of Elders, that we need to look at the positive side of these things, that there are wonderful things, wonderful opportunities that our children are going to have. When you look at the Bible and the history, you find that there were difficult times when Daniel and his 3 friends were taken into captivity. Now, that would have been pretty scary, but look at the positive side of it, who they became and what they did and the great exploits they had. And you could, Jeremiah was another one. There are many individuals who went through some very difficult times. Esther was taken into the harem, so to speak. I'm sure it wasn't all wonderful and great, but you think about the wonderful opportunities. Don't sit in fear of these things, but take them as a challenge. I think Mr. Smith made a comment someplace that it's not time to not have families. It's a time to have strong families. And I think that makes good sense. Don't stop having families, but just realize the challenges and work extra hard to help your family to be strong.
Thank you for that. You made a comment earlier that, because we had talked about that in the council with Matthew 24, and Jesus Christ was also addressing the disciples directly concerning what was coming on Jerusalem. And if you look at Josephus and what he describes of that time, that for those who were still in Jerusalem leading up to its fall, it was horrific. There's tales without going into detail, but the cannibalism, at least one woman, eating her child, but that was inside. But we also know from various tales, but Christians who heeded Christ's warnings and escaped from Jerusalem and got out of there when they saw the armies and were able to escape, if you'd have had children then, it would have been difficult to escape. It would have been a little harder. You have someone to manage. But at the same time, it was those children who escaped with those families of the Christians who left Jerusalem that continued to help laying the foundation for the church to be able to continue. I wouldn't take that as some sort of admonition. You don't see Christ saying, don't have children. It would be a special time of challenge. But rather, I would think, kind of like in this time, I want to then invest in my children in such a way so when these hard times come, we're primed for it. I've raised some who are ready for it. So yeah, I appreciate the insights that came there at the meeting concerning that being in Jerusalem.
Another thing you mentioned yesterday, Mr. Weston, that I really appreciated was how anti having kids the world has become, and you commented on that. And I thought in a very helpful way.
Yeah, a lot of young people are afraid to have children because they're going to destroy the earth. This whole insanity of the
Anti-natalism.
excessive green movement. Not that we shouldn't take care of the environment. I've always felt that that's important, but they've gone way beyond.
I heard so my I better be generic. Somebody I'm related to said this, but I'd heard this before from the kind of progressive environmentalist side. There's nothing more dangerous to the environment than families. No, with farms with large families.
Really?
Which is, essentially literally the opposite of how God has designed it and arranged things. But it just, how anti-human we've become here at the end of the age is striking. Like, you should actually sacrifice yourself and whatever is necessary for the earth. The earth is the most important. And we do. You're right. We want to take care of it. But at the same time, it's like, well, do Mother Nature a favor and stop having families.
Well, it's upside down. You look at Genesis. God created, in Isaiah, the earth to be inhabited. This was meant to be something for us, and what does that imply? That we should manage it well, to be sure. That we should take care of it. That we, just like Adam and Eve were to take care of the garden. At the same time, it's been turned into we're of less importance. Mm-hmm. Well, the best thing that could happen for the earth is for all the humans to disappear. And that's not even Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, God didn't tell Adam and Eve, just leave everything alone. Don't touch it. I made it perfect. He literally wanted them to tend and to keep it. It needed some manufacturing.
That just
not manufacturing. It needed some management. It needed some work.
Mr. Armstrong used to talk about that all the time, like in The Mystery of the Ages, that was a critical thing. God had created the earth, but kind of left it a little incomplete for humanity to do their part. And when humanity was doing their part, they completed the earth and made it better. But we've tended to actually destroy things more than improve them.
Well, they say that's with wildfires. Part of why wildfires get so bad is because we used to go in and harvest the old wood, but manageably, so kind of keep the forest a bit thin enough so fires couldn't spread as well. And now it's like, oh no, we can't go out and get those old trees. And then a fire comes and destroys far more, than we ever would have if we actually had gone in and continued doing such practices. So I know we do have another question, Mr. Weston, but did you have anything more to say on the topic?
Yes, it just what we have is a world that has rejected God. And because they've rejected God, they have no meaning to their life in reality. So they're looking for meaning. And that's one of the reasons that so many people get into this green movement. They makes them feel good that they're doing something. But it also shows a lack of historical perspective. When people talk about farms today, and cows and flatulence and all that sort of thing. Did they ever know how many buffalo existed on this continent at one time? It's just a lack of historical perspective. Our education has turned to all kinds of issues that have nothing to do with the real world, and except wrecking the real world, and they just don't know history. And if they knew history, if they were educated, these things wouldn't be that big of a deal for them.
This is going to be a random observation, and I'm sorry to mention this if it's going to be something maybe you guys need a trigger warning for, but the TV show The View with all the ladies on it? Okay.
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it, all right. Well, they actually had this fairly liberal comedian, Bill Maher, who runs Real Time or some of the TV show, and it was interesting because he's generally on their side. I mean, they all want Mr. Biden. I say they all do. Many want Mr. Biden to be elected. He does as well, mainly because he doesn't want Mr. Trump to be elected. And I appreciate, of all this could sound like odd, I actually appreciate the sincerity of Joy Behar, or that's how she says it, which almost never say I appreciate in her name in the same sentence, because usually if I see a clip, it's something irritating. But she asked him a very sincere question because she was upset that she's not upset that he's critical of Mr. Trump, but on his program, he's often critical as well of Mr. Biden and others. He tends to just speak what he thinks. And she was just up front. She goes, but you say these negative things about Mr. Biden. And she didn't say Mr. Biden. I don't know what she says. But she says, but aren't you afraid? She goes, she said, I literally hold back those things because I'm afraid he won't be elected. Well, that was her literally saying she's not saying things she thinks because she's afraid of what the outcome might be. And the reason it comes to mind is because it seems like that's the way it is in our education now as well. You were just talking about how what are they teaching kids, whether they're stressing this green movement, et cetera. Well, that's because, and I saw this in evolution research, that a lot of scientists will see a study that comes out very anti-evolution. It's a study result that does not match very well the expectations of kind of blind evolution, if you will. I'll say blind. And where they literally try to decide, some of them, well, maybe we shouldn't publish it. Maybe we shouldn't say it because it's just going to fuel the fire of the opposition and the people that have different ideas. And it seems like there's so much going on like that at every level that no one's just concerned about facts anymore. And especially our young people, if they're in educational schools, they're in places that literally have they do have an agenda and they want to indoctrinate them to think a different way. And the next thing they know, they're ignorant of history where it's not helpful. But history that highlights the agenda is being shown to them, and as a result, they're thinking ends up being twisted by the people that are meant to educate them.
Well, speaking of The View, and again, I don't watch it; I just catch the clips that are shown on other stations. But maybe you can clarify this. Wasn't there a question about global warming where a woman recently said that, well, there was the eclipse and there were the cicadas and a lot of them, and there was a third thing that she attributed to global warming?
I did not see that.
I mean, I'm no astrophysicist, but I don't think that the eclipse was caused by climate change.
Nor the cicadas, because there's a certain cycle that they have. But it was several things like that it was so over the top.
Yeah, but if your mind is prepped for that,
the ignorance out there.
That's right. It's like they create in their mind bad things are due to climate change, and they hear about something and they're just that much ready to just think, oh yeah, climate change. Look how bad it is. The cicadas, boy, it's just terrible.
You know, when you hear these things, do people think about them? Do they know anything about chemistry? Do they know anything about history? I think that we have a very ignorant generation in the information age.
Yeah, I think we do, and I think for older individuals, like some of those maybe on The View, it's clearly, even when they do know a little better, they still don't want to say it because they want things to go the way they want them to go. Well, given all this, we thought we'd wrap up the question, and you've touched on so many things that kind of already relate to this. But in a time, there are so many studies, and you're reading the book about the anxious generation, and I appreciate that copy that I've got. So many younger people are in despair. I mean, even before the most, say, COVID and such, already suicides, a lot of things were on an upward trajectory, monitors of both despair and depression in younger individuals, but also happiness levels dropping. All these objective studies saying what is going on because everyone, especially the young in this particular case, were just getting more and more depressed, or they clearly were not filled with any kind of hope. How should because here we are looking at prophecy and seeing that we're not just speculating about the future. We know certain things are coming. We actually have some conscious and focused knowledge. How should our teens and our young adults approach the future? You know, what is there for hope for them? How should they actually look at the future and maintain a hope so they don't get lost in the same kinds of things that other young people in the world are getting lost of in terms of their feelings and reactions?
Well, you know, the Bible has been around a long time, and there's a reason why it's been around a long time, and I think that our young people need to really prove whether the Bible is true or not. And if they are willing to make that effort and know what they believe and know why they believe it, it gives them a foundation upon which to live their lives. And the next thing is that I think they need to look on the world as a challenge. The fact that we're living in difficult times is a challenge. And young people, especially young boys, I think love to take on a challenge. They want to be courageous. Well, you have the opportunity to be courageous. You have the opportunity to slay the dragon or to kill the giant as David did. But it may not look like it in the same way. You may have to stand up as, for example, Harrison Butker stood up for what he believes, and he was not apologetic about what he believed. I don't know that he expected the result of it, but let's take a look at somebody else, Riley Gaines, this woman swimmer. To me, she's one of the bravest people in the country right now. She's willing to take on the wokesters who believe that men should compete with women. A 6'4" man be able to compete in swimming with others. And so she's willing to take them on and take all the hits and all the bad publicity that's coming her way. That's courage. And to me, that's a challenge for our young people, to not care about the criticism, but to simply speak the truth, stand up for the truth, and put the rest in God's hands. But I'd like to see our young people see the world as a challenge. Eat it for lunch, so to speak. It's going to be a difficult time, but it's also difficult times bring out the great people, and they can be great in the right way. And I don't mean carnally speaking, but they can be great in the sight of God.
Smith and Robinson.